This week, Sinan Eren, VP of Zero Trust Access at Barracuda Networks, joins us for a talk on the state of network security in 2021. Then we welcome Justin Collins from the People Empowered for Product Security team at Gusto for a segment focusing on Brakeman. In the security news, anonymous hacks, Epic with a K, fuzzing closed-source JavaScript engines, forced entry, 8 websites that can replace computer software, Revel decryptor key has been released, Microsoft fixes a critical vulnerability in Linux apps, a drone accidentally delivers drug paraphernalia to high schoolers, and more. All on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys.
And here he is, the man, the myth, the legend. You know him, you love him. He's Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 710, recorded on September 16th, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, Mr. Patrick Laverty is here with us. Patrick, welcome.
Hey there, Paul. It's so great to be back here. It feels like I haven't been here in quite a while.
Yes, it's good to have you back.
It's nice.
Yeah, especially in studio.
The studio is awesome. I don't know what's gone on around here, but this, like I was telling you before.
Yeah, you haven't been here.
No, this is awesome. It looks like a hacker museum in here.
We were like, what? We got this pandemic going on, and it was just a few of us in the studio. I'm like, what are we going to do? I'm like, I don't know. Let's do a whole bunch of studio upgrades because we're not traveling or going anywhere. So, yeah, so we hung a ton of TVs, and we've got all the fancy talkback things and teleprompters and... Yeah, it's almost to the point where like I kind of ran out of things to do an upgrade here in the studio. Like,
I wish people could see all of this because I think basically all people ever see is just what's behind us, which is only just a small portion of what's even going on in here.
Yeah, it's really fun. I mean,
awesome.
We did it so that allows us to do fun things now, like live stream building computers, which we did earlier, which was it was interesting. I'm like, so Doug White and I have spent a lot of time building computers. And I'm like, dude, we should live stream it because we had to build Johnny's new workstation. And I realized a lot of things. I was a little nervous because I had never built a computer like in front of a air quotes live audience. So that was it was nerve wracking. And then I didn't realize like the innuendos that Doug and I had to like watch ourselves because I'm like, normally we would just go with the innuendo. We had to hold back a little bit because I'm like, oh, there's like people listening. There could be children listening, so we had to dial it back.
When did you start dialing things back on innuendo?
It was for the children. It was Wu-Tang and Security Weekly are for the children.
And I also think probably the most intimidating thing about what you guys did was try to start it up on as soon as you put it together. Like, how many people have put together a computer and gotten it to start up on the first try?
And you can watch the tape. Like, right. I'm not even twisting you wrong. Like, it did start up on the first try.
It was live.
Yeah. Only took 2 people that have been doing it more than 20 years to pull that off.
Nobody can do that.
Yeah, we were astonished. It was a lot of fun. Let's see. A quick announcement before we get started. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Robert Herjavec, plus the heads of security at NFL TikTok, the U.S. Department Homeland of Security, Stanford University, and more. Security Weekly listeners even save 20% on a digital pass registration, as this conference is now a completely virtual experience happening from November 9th through the 10th. This year. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register today. This segment is sponsored by Barracuda Networks. You can visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda to learn more. Joining us for this segment is Sinan Eren. He's the VP of Zero Trust Access at Barracuda Networks and joins us today to discuss network breaches, ransomware attacks, remote work challenges, and the overall state of network security in 2021. Sinan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul. Good to be here. Patrick.
Hey, Sinan.
It's nice to have you, Sinan. I'd like to start by asking you how you got your start in information security.
That goes back into, I would say, all the way to late 90s. And back then, like most of us, we were hobbyists, right? Reader of Frack, hanging out in IRC, you name it, right? I joined from more the hands-on research, reverse engineering, vulnerability development. That's my original background. Then gradually moved into engineering and product.
I love the background. The certain things you mentioned that I pick up on, Frack Magazine is one of them, because the internet didn't have all the information it has today, and we had to rely on print magazines. Frack was one of them. Remember, like Blacklisted 411? That was another one as well. I loved reading Frack in 2600, right? I mean, that's where we got a lot of our information. Today you find on GitHub, right? But back then it was in those zines, as it were.
Spot on. I like to mention one thing. I think the happiest moment of my whole career, and goes back to 2002, so it's been quite a while. I wrote an article on Frack called "Smashing the Kernel Stack for Fun and Profit," actually as a kind of a homage to the original one, Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit by LF Fun, right? So that's really like the thing that drove me into cybersecurity, gradually turning the hobby into a career like most of us did over a long period of time. But I would say that magazine, holds a special place in my heart and in my career.
Dude, you're like internet famous. Like you had a Smashing the Stack article in Frack. That's really cool.
18 plus years ago. Since then, it's been downhill.
Yeah, and so at some point, you turned entrepreneur because you came to Barracuda through acquisition, right?
That's right. So some of you might know, like there was this quite a brilliant, entrepreneur called Dave Vitale. Started his pen testing business called Immunity. I joined there after my first kind of a product engineering role. Did a lot of consulting, pen testing, hopping on the plane and all that stuff, right? And if you do that for 10 years, that's your shelf life, right? You had to come out and start looking what's next. So I wanted to go back into building, security tooling and defensive technologies and solutions, right? So yes, we did start a company called FIDE, originally in the basically what at the time was Beyond Corp. The whole craze was about Beyond Corp. After Project Aurora, Google put that amazing framework together. Now we all collectively refer to as Zero Trust. Well, Gartner wasn't satisfied with that, so I had to come and add additional flavors to it and turn it into Sassy. So essentially, FIDE was a modernization, let's say, quote unquote next gen, right? It's a sticky term, but let's say next gen VPN solution with role-based access control, attribute-based access control, basically a modernization. Kind of when the refresh cycle hit on VPN, folks are now migrating pretty heavily to zero trust network access. That's what the genesis of FIDE was all about, which got picked up by Barracuda.
And you were one of the founders there, Sinan?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I'm the original founder and CEO.
That's awesome. Congrats. That's great. I love Dave, by the way. Dave Vitale's awesome. And you worked for Dave for 10 years? Yeah.
Maybe almost 10 years, maybe 9.5 or something like that. Yeah, it's been a brilliant, I mean, he's my mentor. I learned a lot from the man. Entrepreneurship, hustling out there. Yeah. Just a brilliant mind overall.
And I mean, really having that offensive mindset for, those almost 10 years must have really given you like the great insights you needed to go create a company focused on defense, no?
That's right. I mean, the entire, I would say, philosophy was about attack surface removal, right? We are nowhere near, I would say, as maybe, feature rich and capability rich with maybe some other players, but our core focus, being a very nimble, agile team was, okay, let's do this right. Coming from an offensive mindset, how can we remove the most amount of attack surface from the network, right? So we, really spent a lot of time building the concept of device identity. Can we store a certificate in the device's TPM, a CP model to identify the device, not just the user, right? And manage the entire life cycle of a device coming into a network and then getting deprovisioned later on. So those kind of things were, I would say, really the learnings from coming from an offensive background. Basically, you need to identify the services. They need to be service identity concept. There need to be identity for the, all the relays, all the proxies that you have, ingress, egress. You need to have identity for the users, of course, which is pretty big industry by itself. But of course, now device identity is picking up as well and becoming a dominant, I would say, pillar for cybersecurity and network security in general.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about when we talk about the state of network security, how we control our attack surface and what's exposed that an attacker could come after. It's so hard today. I mean, 20 years ago, we date ourselves, right? It was whatever you had plugged in, it was exposed to the network. It was a physical box that was plugged in. Now your attack surface, like you're saying, Sinan, is your users, it's your services. It's all these things that aren't really they're not as tangible as they used to be. And that presents challenges, no?
That's spot on. We were talking with your friend Doug over there, and he was talking about being, a benevolent dictator of his own corporate perimeter, right? Everything used to be stacked up on top of each other. You have a very well-defined corporate perimeter where you can overlay, network security equipment like firewalls, you name it, DDoS protection, whatever you need it, right? But now a lot more applications are migrating to public cloud. So essentially, there is no one strict definition of the perimeter, but even more so, applications are moving to SaaS, right? These are hosted application by the vendors, right? You don't have deep hooks and policy controls that you traditionally have when it comes to the corporate network. Therefore, security tooling needs to evolve to support this distributed users with their devices, in some cases personal devices, and of course the decentralized nature of infrastructure, and even more decentralized SaaS applications that users can access from anywhere, from any device. Especially in the middle of a pandemic, we started to see that there were cracks forming around the traditional sense of network security, where you concentrate everybody into a secure corporate perimeter, and then you let them hit, public internet. Is not scaling, is not working. So, you need to move the controls where the users are, where the devices are, and where the applications reside.
And that's so important today. I mean, we can remember years ago when I would use a dial-up modem to get into my, company that I worked for. And then after that, I would have a laptop. And the only way I could get at internal resources and applications that I needed to access was a fat VPN client that I had to install on my laptop. I mean, that's long gone. Salesforce, I think, led that charge of, the first really big SaaS application. And now today, I mean, you could run pretty much every application that your company would need in the cloud as a SaaS application. And my question, Sinan, is how do we deal with that challenge today? And I know, Gartner and others are throwing around terms like Sassy and zero trust. And I think our audience really wants to know, like, what does that really mean?
Yeah, I mean, we did survey about 750 IT leaders, decision makers, and we found out in average there's about 30 plus SaaS apps deployed, right? And we're not counting shadow IT. We're not counting what the employees are trying to, use some paste bin and Dropbox here and there, right? Just excluding all those, officially sanctioned about 30 SaaS applications from this surveyed pool of 750 decision makers, CIO types, right? So that tells you that it is it's a growing challenge, right? How do you secure? How do you control? So we found out that I think the best approach to that is to really invest in your identity and access management first, as kind of the foundation to build additional layers of security, especially when it comes to securing SaaS applications, right? So before SASE, CASB was basically the evangelizing this concept. Let's basically get your users, before they can federate and authenticate to SaaS applications, to a central point. That's your identity provider, right? Well, now you get them to the identity provider. With that hook, you can kind of build additional security controls from the authentication point on. And that's kind of what, Zero Trust Network Access and CASB build on top. Let's get everybody to an identity provider for authentication, capture the traffic there, and then build, more traditional like network security controls, or attribute-based controls about the device's security posture, user's location, whether they have critical patches, or whether they are still with the company, right? Like basic authorization, you kind of build it from the identity point on. So it's critical for everybody to, at this point, make a a robust investment into identity and access management and centralize all that, have one source of truth for all your users and user groups.
And now, Sinan, identity and access management, that's not something Barracuda does, correct?
No, we don't. Yeah, we partner, folks like Microsoft, companies like Microsoft and Azure ADs, for example, a very popular, identity management solution that we build on top. Right. So our Zero Trust solution, our web security solution will basically integrate with Azure AD. And then from there on, we will provide additional, more traditional network-like security controls for the SecOps teams and, IT ops teams.
And I love that too, because you're like, look, this is really step one in your security journey today, especially in 2021, is you need an identity and access management provider. You need a way to identify the user and have them access services. Because as we established, like before, I take my laptop around or I'd use a dial-up modem, but now the perimeter is really gone and all you have is the ability to identify a user. And that's where it really starts, which I think is kind of interesting. I've never quite thought about it in quite that way as being that critical of a step.
No, totally agreed. I think that is the most foundational work anybody can do today, because once you start getting and building user identity, soon enough, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, that's, at least from my point of view, is going to be the biggest transformation, is we're going to have an identity fabric of not just user, but devices, right? You're going to have very, very fine-grained identity for your devices. The services will have identity. So can this device access the service A, happens to reside in some site that might be on Azure or on GCP or on AWS? It really doesn't matter. The network is completely abstracted away. It's essentially users, devices, services, applications with their unique identities, attested identities, accessing each other, communicating with each other. But all of that will be basically enforced and controlled through an identity fabric. That is basically your control plane. That is basically where you enforce your policies and your security and your rules, right? This identity talks to that identity. Is that explicitly granted or not? That's the kind of level of thinking we're going to do going forward. Not IPs, not subnets, no more ports. Network is going to get completely abstracted away.
I think the network nerd in all of us is kind of like, but when you think about it, it was like, oh, well, this person's working from home, so just allow their IP address through the firewall. That doesn't work anymore. Right. I don't know if it ever really worked all that well because it was at the network layer. And I really like the app user data approach to security, because that's what we're controlling today. And that segues into this kind of, I don't want to call it a buzz term, but we put these acronyms around, mostly acronyms, right, around the latest security technologies. And the newish one is Sassy. How does that work? If I'm in an organization, I've done a good job at identity management, how do I start thinking about, how do I implement Sassy? Like, what is it, and how do I start scoping this project, Sinan?
Yeah, I would say that first thing that you need to look into is, did you have your identity and access management, investment already done? Tick, right? That's kind of like the prerequisite. From there on, I would say Sassy is essentially a blueprint of, that enables convergence of various point solutions and security products into a platform, right? You, as a practitioner, now you can consume these solutions with ease from a central cloud-based location, cloud-based control point, essentially a dashboard, a management console, right? We went through this evolution of, ripping the appliance from the data center, right? And then moving it to the cloud. And then instead of CapEx, now you have OpEx, you're subscribing to a service, you're getting web security, you're getting remote access, all cloud delivered, right? But now people were getting a bit fatigued about managing, as we said, like any company uses about 30 plus SaaS solutions. Well, if you ask a CISO, if you ask a security practitioner, they have at least a dozen security vendors that they have to deal with, right? That also becoming a major fatigue. Besides the alert fatigue, it become a major fatigue to deploy and manage a dozen or 2 dozen point solutions to get security done, right? Therefore, Sassy kind of is converging all these point solutions into a single platform where you can have in one pillar networking, That's typically SD-WAN, connecting your sites and locations, and firewall as a service, right? Very traditional network security, defining the essence of which network can access which other network, basic firewalling. And on the other pillar, you have security, which Gartner bundles in things like CASB for SaaS application security, zero trust network access for what VPN used to be, but in a more granular, more explicit fashion. And finally, web security, right? You click on bad things, you download malware, ransomware, you click on phishing links. So kind of networking for connectivity, security for all the well-known use cases, they all get put together under the Sassy umbrella for the practitioners to consume it from a single trusted vendor and don't have to deal with onboarding a dozen vendors and managing contracts and all that.
Sinan, how do we deal with the device aspect of it? Because as you describe this model, my brain starts going to, if I can validate the user says who they are and define what they can access based on who they've already proved who they are, how much do I care about? I mean, I care about what device they're coming from, but do I need to manage that device? And I'm talking like in the future, like, do I really need to manage that device anymore?
Spot on. I think you're 100% there. That is the future. No, you should not manage the device, but you should be able to set a baseline policy, right? Is the basic cyber hygiene, getting automatic updates? Oh, well, is it jailbroken or rooted? Well, it happens to have an actual keylogger or malware already installed on this gadget, right? So if you can basically establish a baseline policy and attest to that at the time of onboarding, at the time, not just onboarding, at the time of every time the user tries to access something, if you're collecting telemetry from this device, doesn't matter it's company owned, personally owned, or even a borrowed device, a hotel lobby gadget, right? As long as you can attest to its security at the time of access, I think it should be 100% be part of your, enablement. You should not get in front of the people anymore, right?
Yeah. Do I need to put software?
Validate. Go ahead.
Sorry, Sinan. Do I need to put software on that device to make this attestation? Which I'm okay with, by the way, right? Because I mean that, but I don't need to maybe have persistent access to it and manage it. But something probably needs to run on this device to do that attestation, correct?
That is correct. Yes, it's super tough to say that you can do proper security checks and attestation from a browser, right? And you don't get high fidelity information. You don't get enough telemetry from just writing something in JavaScript that renders in, that does all the callbacks on Chrome, let's say. So you do need an application, but we're working hard to make it as lightweight as possible as an industry. So it could be actually an app directly provisioned from the App Store, right? Like, you could be pulling from the Mac Store, even the Windows Store, iOS and Android Store, you name it. So it doesn't have to be a heavy agent that run with system privileges. Actually, on the contrary, as an industry, we should really step back a little and say, do we really need root everywhere? Do we really need system, processes everywhere? Think about the AV, right? That is the most, privileged vantage point with drivers and running, agents as system or root. We also need to broker our services and go with the best practices and also run our applications with the least possible privilege, and maybe only escalate when we're checking for one of those, things like is the device, is up to date, right? Maybe then you only need to escalate to verify that information, and then you also go back to running as a low privileged user application, right? So there's a lot of work being done. I could say that these applications are getting a lot lightweight. They're not heavy system root agents anymore, and they are also adapting to what they're preaching, which is more secure design.
Yeah, and also the approach I like in these scenarios, Sinan, is that I can grant access or revoke access based on how I assess that device and what its level of security is. In other words, if I'm traveling and I'm at a family member's house and I'm like, oh my God, I need to go check my email because I just got a text and there's a potential security event as a security practitioner, right? And I can go to that device, and since it's a new device, it doesn't have the full management software on it, I only get a certain level of access, right? Maybe if I go to my laptop that's company issued, that's a much more trusted device. Therefore, from that device, I can go manage systems. I can go provision users and do what I normally do in my role in IT or security. But I like this, like being able to determine what a user can access based on how they validate who they are and how much validation I can do with that device. And this is all possible today, right? I'm not talking in the future. This is technology that exists today.
Yes, it's one of the best definitions of conditional access I heard anybody describe. So that's really spot on. It's essentially conditional access, and the conditions doesn't mean it's a binary decision that you get access or you don't, right? You get levels of access, right? You know, it's legally mandated that you get to download your pay stubs from an HR portal. Nobody should put roadblocks in front of it. But guess what? You're not going to be able to get to the source code repository. You're not going to be able to do git pull because your device doesn't have disk encryption, right? The company should be able to basically define those access levels based on the conditions that, you know, your device, your location, maybe if you are part of a GDPR or some sort of a regulatory framework, maybe location factors into that too. Then they can, you know, basically give you more privilege, more access, or less and less and less to a point that you only get the very simple applications that they have to offer to you. So you can move up and down on that scale depending on the condition and the context.
And what I like about that I think I've already seen is that if you compromise user or steal a user's credentials, that's an instant roadblock that you're putting in front of the attackers, right? Because they're not. I mean, okay, I could compromise the user's workstation, right? But in a lot of instances we've seen, I end up with user credentials and I'm going to try and access that from somewhere else. Even the basic rudimentary, you mentioned, Beyond Corp and all that stuff, puts a lot of roadblocks in the attacker's path to say, like, no, you can't just get a new device and start using these credentials because that's, one, a new event, and two, I haven't validated that device in any capacity before.
That's spot on. I can say that, you steal credentials, and there's unfortunately ways to do downgrade attacks on multi-factor authentication, right? You can always report your token to be lost or stolen. They always kind of have a backup for text message or a call, right?
Yep.
You can kind of keep downgrading that till you even bypass two-factor authentication, right? So therefore, having a means to kind of identify the device becomes a much more important, I would say, additional factor for you to be able to access anything, right? It's beyond the username and the password, even the potential to enter a TOTP or an SMS, shortcode. Now you need to have a device certificate that kind of unlocks the access gate for you. And it's tough to, clone that because it's typically stored on a keychain that's hardware backed, right? It's not that simple. Even if you compromise the user directly on the endpoint, you shouldn't be easily extract that device key out of that gadget, right? So adding that as another form of authentication, the device identity component, really makes stolen credentials less of a threat.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm thinking of email security. If you could actually control, well, this is, a device we haven't seen before. And yes, they did this level of kind of, user identity to prove who they are. But that means you can only see the last 5 days of email and see new emails coming in, but you can't see the whole history, and start applying more granular controls to really put roadblocks in the attacker's way. This is kind of where I see this technology evolving to.
Indeed, that's a very good way to put it. You can say, okay, I operate in a very secure organization, and if this device is not known to me, you don't get access at all. Or like you said, you can say, well, this device is not known to me, therefore I'm only giving you limited access to ABC, right? The organizations can really take that lever up and down as they see fit, depending on their risk profile, right?
Yeah, I think it's a lot like we see with our home banking, where if it's a device that the bank hasn't seen before and hasn't been authorized, you're not getting access.
Right. I've been there.
I think we all have.
Right. And you're like, wait, what was that security question again? You're
Who was my best friend in kindergarten?
Text messaging your wife and like, what? Wait, what was that?
Where's my phone?
Yeah. Absolutely. Sinan, how do we integrate? I still think phishing is, and Patrick can attest to this. You're still doing pen testing full time, Patrick.
Yeah, and I especially love phishing.
And it's still one of the
it
best
works.
ways to get into an organization.
I see some horrendous campaigns that work.
Yeah,
And it's kind of sad how easily that phishing can work. And one of the things that I like to say is I only need it to work once.
Right.
You only need that one set of credentials that
for
work
one user
to be able to get in, and too often it just works over and over.
Sinan, how do we work like phishing protection into this mix, right? Knowing that that's the primary kind of access method for attackers.
Teach the man how to fish. He makes bank in cybersecurity for all his life, right?
Right.
It's the most effective tool, period, for pen testers, and obviously for attackers and you know, criminal syndicates as well. There's no denying that. Yeah, I mean, strong authentication, you know, really the two-factor MFA is these, you know, table stakes. We got to get that done. There's a lot more telemetry-based solutions that leverage machine learning, right? You collect continuous telemetry. You got a bit more comfortable over time about the user's certain patterns. These things help a lot, right? You know, okay, yeah, you let's assume the credentials are going to get stolen. But the authentication, right, whether, you know, there's a SAML or some sort of an OpenID Connect hook there, through that you can actually say, oh, wait a second, I have never seen this user come in through this way, right? So all these kind of additional telemetry that you collect about users' behavior now can add additional hurdles to attackers when it comes to phishing. So this is an evolving, obviously we can't try to prevent, right? You have email security solutions that are very good at this. They can pick up, you know, newly registered domains. They have all kind of tremendous, you know, investments into AI and machine learning, etc. But let's assume it's always going to go through at some point, right? Or some of the attacks are going to go through. I think with additional layers of, you know, behavioral and heuristical analysis, we can add more challenges, like you were talking about the bank, right? So those credentials will be a lot less valuable to the attackers if it gets harder for them to just, you know, continue authenticating and laterally moving from there.
I think we often regard, you know, AI and machine learning as buzzwords and kind of dismiss it, but it has its place, especially in the scenarios where we're talking about. How much effort, and then my question is, like, how much effort do you have to put into the training of all this, right? So you're setting up, you got identity management, you're setting up Sassy. We're not just turning on controls, right? There's a learning kind of period that you previously described to me. What does that learning period look like for your customers?
Right. I mean, email is not my domain. I'll leave that to Mike.
Sure.
Maybe you'll get to meet him someday. But I can talk about application access, right? SaaS application, internal applications. You do indeed start with, you know, like all security you know, solutions and platforms in the last 15, 20 years, you monitor, right? You start to see certain access patterns. Okay. Oh, well, look what is so obvious. The users that are in HR group is accessing a bunch of HR databases, right? So you can try to start tagging the applications that you might not even know existed, right? You might not have a proper asset inventory. And you're like, okay, start to see some patterns. And then there will be outliers, right? Those will be actually where you spend your time manually trying to understand, what the hell is this? Why this one user accessing this, you know, weird workload in AWS 190 times a day, right? So maybe that's what you should be focusing on, while everything else can be turned into some sort of an explicit access rule going forward, right? These three databases belong to HR. Only HR and maybe 2 IT guys who manage them can access them and nobody else, right? So that's how we essentially do that. Monitor, try to build some relation graph about the users, their devices, and the applications that they access, and gradually tighten the screw essentially so that you make it more explicit, rather than just like, you know, as long as you get to the network, you access everything, goes away, it becomes more of a, you know, this roles can access this set of applications.
And what I like about these solutions too is it's not always a binary decision. It's not, I want to allow access versus I don't. It's, well, if these things that don't normally happen, that could be maybe an indication of an attack or nefarious activity, that means maybe the answer is not no, but it's provide me with your multi-factor authentication, do some extra level of validation before they're able to take those actions. And I really think we can make a lot of analogies to the real world, but in our world, I mean, that's really where we need to be, because these systems are terribly complex. And, you know, not just having to be a 0 or 1, but going, well, when this happens, I need your multi-factor authentication again. I think that's a valid strategy. A
brilliant strategy indeed. I mean, there's another one that's a favorite of mine. if you're using Teams or Slack, you just Slack the person like a bot Slacks today.
Yeah.
Was that you SSHing into this workflow that you have never done before? And that, yes, is amazing because you have an audit trail now. The user confirmed over yet another factor, right? It's not just your phone-based, multi-factor, but yet another kind of a response, and you put it on the audit trail. Another one that I like, is a quick example. You can say, you know what, I'm going to grant you access, but in this box that I popped up in front of your screen, explain to me why you're accessing. And then they submit, you grant them access. Again, there's an audit trail. The supervisor, the SecOps teams are going to see that, right? And they're going to say, okay, there was an emergency, and the guy had to SSH into that box. So that those kind of things are it really improves security without building roadblocks that risks business continuity.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, my brain's distracted because I had this really funny conversation with my wife about machine learning. And I want to just segue a bit because it's really funny as we're talking about machine learning, and we were watching this commercial for Roomba vacuums. I don't know if you guys ever had a Roomba vacuum, and I don't know if you have pets either. But one of the heinous horror stories on the internet is if your Roomba vacuum runs over the dog's poo, for example, right? And it's horrible. The new Roomba vacuum will actually avoid your dog's poo. And my wife's like, because that's actually happened to us.
I remember when you tweeted about that a couple of years ago.
And I was like, but sweetie, you do realize, I think that's cool, but you do realize that there was meetings at Roomba where engineers and product managers were talking about how they could use hardware and software and machine learning to identify poop. I'm like, that must have been some of the most, to me, hilarious conversations, about that. It's very similar to Google Photos or any machine learning. I'm like, it doesn't need to know that there's a glass on the floor or something else on the floor. It just knows that's poop, and everything else, I don't need to know what it is. I need to know that it's not poop. I'm like, they had these in-depth conversations about how to do that and probably showed it lots of pictures of poop. And I'm like, that's a really kind of interesting way to describe machine learning. I could describe machine learning to my wife in various different ways, but when I did it in that way, she got it, right? And that's a really great use case and also really hilarious. We talk about machine learning, and I can imagine conversations going behind the scenes at Barracuda, but that conversation about Roomba is absolutely hilarious, in my opinion.
And the only thing that had to have been worse than those conversations was being on the QA team of testing that it works.
Testing it, right?
Hey, let's try it with this one.
But that's essentially what we're talking about, right? Is in this context, attackers or various scenarios, how do you identify what's good and what's bad? And there's certainly great use cases in security when we talk about Sassy and these other technologies as well. Sorry, Sinan, I had to segue.
No, I completely agree. And
Totally
there's
derailed
field
them.
testing, of course, including the poo. But also we have a lot of these, new up and coming technologies that simulates breaches and attacks, right? So you can kind of have this reinforcement of this learning, and the model continuously adapting by actually leveraging offensive tooling, right? So it feeds on itself and it gets better. I think we should invest in both sides, right? Let's invest in offensive tooling so that it can generate more signals for the defensive algorithms, machine learning to improve on that, right? So I think, with that, there's going to be a lot more interesting additional edge cases. Attackers are going to find interesting adversarial tactics against machine learning. It's an evolving, science, or engineering field, let's say, but it's also very exciting at the same time. There's tremendous potential.
Sorry, Johnny my producer was talking in my ear. I'm not sure if it was on purpose or not. So no. That's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going next. Sorry, I got distracted.
You got distracted again thinking about the Roomba.
I did. No, I do. It wasn't. And then there was chatter in my head as well. I apologize, Sinan. So, Sinan, I think we've mapped out the roadmap pretty well in terms of what you need to be successful when we talk about SASE technology, right? Identity management is critical. From there, it's basically a monitor and then tune in your environment. What other conversations are you having with customers about how they can take advantage of this technology to really use it to both monitor and prevent attacks in their environments?
Right. I could say that about the folks that we surveyed and discussed. About 3/4 of them already made an SD-WAN investment. Right. There's another acronym and a jargon there, but basically after the identity investment, now they're investing into creating a network, a conduit, a network fabric, if you will, right? So they can have consistent policy enforcement across different sites and locations. Mm-hmm. And when we say locations, we're not just talking about offices, right? Some of these folks have factory floors or OT environments, right? So they're kind of connecting their networks and sites together through SD-WAN after the identity investment is in place, and then from there on, they're building additional controls, as part of the Sassy deployment. But I would say after IAM, SD-WAN is I would say the second most important roadmap item towards Sassy.
And this also was really about vendor consolidation as well, because a lot of what we're talking about, you can go to a lot of different vendors and start stringing this together. But from what I'm hearing from Barracuda, the messaging is you can get this kind of in one place. And I think what we're hearing also from CISOs, right, is they want less vendors to deal with, to be able to implement. And I'm all about this too, because I feel like you should have the tool that works best for you. And I don't want to take that away from people. Like if developers work great in this IDE, that's the one they should work with, right? And I think when you have this set of technologies and solutions from one vendor, it sets you up for success, because you've got one platform that's doing multiple things rather than 6 different platforms or more from 6 different vendors that you're working on integrating together. And as we all know as technologists, that integration is constant maintenance.
That's exactly right. And now vendors are taking two different approaches. If they have the balance sheet, they're going and acquiring companies, and then they're kind of filling the gaps in their portfolio towards the platform approach, right? The network security platform, the endpoint security platforms. You'll see the same from Barracuda. You see it from endpoint security vendors like CrowdStrike. They're filling the gaps because everybody is approaching it through a platform that you are already onboarded with the vendor. You have a trust relation dating multiple years. You went through compliance, legal, all that wonderful stuff. You really don't want to add to that, yet another startup, right? And of course, perhaps a bit controversial, but some of these vendors, especially Silicon Valley funded vendors, will have, balance sheets that cash flow statements that says, we spent $3 to make $1, right? So What happens? Another 2008 happens, right? Another kind of a macro shock happens. How many of these vendors are going to be providing you support going down the road, right? So you also need to find these vendors that have, relatively strong balance sheet that can go through cycles of economic activity and still be there to support you. I am a startup guy. I do believe in innovation and more startups going, but they also have to quickly find ways to integrate and kind of build a platform, whether through OEM, whether through partnership, in order to also have staying power when entire security tooling is kind of converging into a platform. They should maybe really look, to their business development team, to their, VP of partnership, to, okay, you know what? It's time to get together with all these other point solution vendors and startups and build something that is a bit more comprehensive.
And I think it also speaks to the SMB market as well. Is that an area of focus for Barracuda in your mind, Sinan?
Yeah, most certainly. We do have an MSP unit, and I think SMB is dear to my heart. It's I would say kind of the soft belly, if you will, right? There's tremendous amount of risk to our national security through SMBs because they're part of the supply chain, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there is all kind of, compliance framework like CMMC is coming up saying that, okay, we got to go really look, all the suppliers, the vendor from Idaho supplying potatoes to the DoD should also be certified to be secure enough, right? Because, if you compromise an SMB that has, that they are part of the supply chain, you can literally move from that SMB all the way into a critical organization, into a Fortune, 500 organization. Therefore, SMB is underserved, but as Barracuda, we have an MSP unit. And we believe the way to small businesses is through empowering MSPs to provide them more security services. MSPs are now in a rush to be more, MSSPs, right? More cybersecurity offerings behind, besides the traditional endpoint management, backup and restore. Now they're offering a lot more cybersecurity services. So we see SMBs can be, secured and really the right way to approach them is through their MSP relations to bring them to also a level of security hygiene that we need as a nation.
Yeah, it begs that question, Sinan, when you're at that SMB level, you're 70 to 100 employees. And I think when you're like at that level, you probably have an MSP, right?
Yeah.
And you're at this, you're creeping towards this crossroads where, like, do I have the MSP and an MSSP, and how do I like match their technologies together? Well, like, what's your advice on that front? And that's a really selfish question, because that's kind of where CRA is today. Just FYI, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, and this MSPs are in a rush to become MDRs and XDRs, right? So we did acquire a company called Scout so that we can expand our MSP services to more managed detection and response, right? Extended detection and response, because I don't think MSPs are there just to do, IT related workflows only. They are part of the very, security fabric. Cybersecurity is part of IT at that level, right? We're talking about, like you said, 70, 100, sometimes even less, actually. There's, 10, 15, 20 person, dentist offices that needs IT and security service, and they get them through MSPs, right? There's a lot of these, small businesses, MSPs themselves, providing tremendous value to, hundreds of thousands of small businesses. So empowering them and making it very easy for them to deploy, generate value, but also make money, right, is the way to go. And I think MSP and the MSSP and MDR, XDR, that definitions are going to get blurred, at least for the SMB market. It's just going to be full service from your MSP. They will have all the stack to, service your needs, from IT ops to security ops.
I like that approach too, because I feel like that's the same direction we're going in when you've got like a NOC and a SOC, right? You've got your, networking and IT teams plus a security team. I mean, that's really kind of merging into one. And what you're saying, Sinan, is the MSP and MSSP market are kind of merging into one as well. And I think one of the gaps between there is that security operations function, right? Like, it's one thing to say, okay, everything's patched, everyone's deployed the same software, it's kept up to date, and in that, but then there's how do I look and see if someone's compromised on a proactive or active basis? And that's where that merging needs to happen. You think that's a skills and technology gap?
I would say we do have a major talent skills gap, but that's why I think MSPs can play an important factor there to triage all these alerts and alarms that the solutions that they deploy generate, right? I mean, they need to service those. It's not enough to go and deploy a firewall and kind of remotely manage it on occasion. No, you also need to now triage all these alerts that the security tooling generates. So I can see the talent side is going to be always tricky, right? I think the technology is there. There's a lot more of these, platforms that integrate with 100+ network solutions. They collect telemetry, they collect logs and alerts from them, and they can help analysts to triage and to respond and to remediate those issues. But can we hire fast enough these analysts to help, through the MSP channel to service the SMB? I don't have a good answer. And we definitely should be doing a lot more on the education side when it comes to cybersecurity. It is a great career to have. I mean, I recommend anybody and everybody that is interested in a SOC or an MDR, XDR style. It's tough, but it's a good way to enter cybersecurity, and we need more talent.
And I think the MSP kind of talent pool is a great place to start in giving them some security knowledge and kind of merge that. That's a great. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, Sinan. I think that's a great suggestion. It's a good place to start, especially for a lot of the towns, like in municipalities as well, right? We kind of consider them as SMBs, maybe not the number of people, but when we look at some of the recent attacks, and everyone just think about their own city or town they live in, like here in the U.S., for an example, we know that the IT side is usually really weak.
That's spot on. I think we should take those technicians that work at MSPs, really increase their cybersecurity know-how and knowledge base. And they also get to earn more, right? It's a high demand. I think that grassroots efforts can pay dividends, many years to come if we can get the MSP technicians to get more cybersecurity knowledge and support their SMB base with more value add, right? Everybody gets the benefit.
Patrick, did you have more questions for Sinan?
I don't at this time. It's been pretty awesome to hear about all this stuff as we go through it. And like you were just saying, talking about the towns that we live in, we're probably lucky if we have one person dedicated to IT in these towns. So, just like you said, that you might think that there's a lot of people in a town where there might be 25, 30,000 people, but the dedicated IT team is really, at best, one person.
One person, yeah. Sinan, I just have 5 silly questions for you.
Oh boy.
Here on Security Weekly. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Well, let's do it.
3 words to describe yourself.
Curious, hungry, I guess, short on the third word.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Katana.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
From the Eastern Med.
I'm going to ask the next question, but also yesterday, I forgot that yesterday was, in fact, the 26th anniversary of the movie Hackers. Sinan, what is your favorite hacker movie?
Ghost in the Shell, the original animation.
Awesome movie. Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents. Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
And gender does not matter.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah. Aristotle and Hayek.
Sinan.
Philosophers.
Awesome. Awesome. Sinan, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly this evening.
Thank you, Paul Patrick. This was super fun.
It was great.
And this segment is sponsored by Barracuda. Again, folks who want to learn more can visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Coming up next, Justin Collins from Gusto. Stick around.